Today we will be covering some essential knife skills. Cutting things properly in the kitchen is one of the best ways to improve your cooking skills because it's something you do all the time, especially if you're working with a lot of produce. So first and foremost, start with making sure you have a really safe cutting board, because if you have your cutting board on the counter and it's just wobbling around, that leads you to potentially injuring yourself. So I always put a wet paper towel down, or sometimes you can get cutting boards that have like a little bit of a grip on the bottom of them, and then just putting the cutting board on top, and now it won't move while you're actually cutting on this surface. So we'll start with how to actually hold your knife. So this is a chef's knife. Chef's knives are anywhere between 8 and 12 inches generally. I find a lot of people try and put their finger on top to get a little more strength, but that's actually not going to give you more strength. That's going to make your grip a little bit unstable. So instead, you actually want to basically pinch with your finger and your thumb right up near the top, and then just wrap your other fingers around. So you don't want to be really far back on your knife. If you really need a lot of pressure, you can actually even grip up on your knife, but generally just right where the handle is meeting that knife blade is a good place to hold. And then you'll also want to make sure that you have your other fingers that are holding the food out of the way so that they're safe. So you don't want to have flat fingers here that are holding your food. Instead, you want to make a claw. And I always think, put your elbow out, that helps get it in the right position, and then make a little claw. So basically, if you're cutting, you're going to be right along that knuckle, and that's going to prevent you from actually chopping off a finger. And then you want to really have kind of a gentle rocking motion. So the tip of the blade usually actually stays in contact with that cutting board for most of the cut. There are a few cuts that you'll need to make where you'll need to lift it up, but you're basically kind of going rocking back and forth, and then you're moving your finger along, and you're just kind of moving with your finger as your guide. So we'll go ahead and demonstrate a few kind of the essential cuts. First one is with an onion, because I find an onion is what I'm chopping almost every single day. This root end here is really important to keep intact, because that's what's actually going to keep the onion together as you're making your cuts. Otherwise, you're having pieces of onion kind of going all over your cutting board, and it makes it a lot more challenging. So I always cut it in half right through the root end, then just peel off that layer of skin. And then with the onion, we're going to do a dice first. And so a dice is essentially making small, evenly sized pieces. So there can be a large dice, which might be as large as 3/4 inch cubes. A medium dice is generally about 1/2 inch cubes, and a small dice is about 1/4 inch cubes. I find I use a small or a medium dice most of the time. A large dice could be helpful for potatoes or carrots in a big chunky stew or something. But for dicing this onion, start with your claw hand, and you're actually going to cut parallel with the cutting board first. So I make my claw on top, or you can even just kind of do a flat palm. Sometimes I find that's easier too. And I always move my body if I need to get into the right position, because sometimes if you're up here, it's awkward to move your food in different ways. So I will go ahead and make probably about 3 different horizontal cuts in the onion. And I'm holding it on tight just to keep all the layers together so it doesn't move on me, like that. Barely needed to hold that a little tighter. And get one more in here. Because with a dice, you want nice, evenly sized pieces so that it cooks really well for you, really evenly. You don't have tiny pieces that are burning, large ones that are still raw. All right, so next we're gonna make vertical cuts. So this one I'm going to actually do what we call it for our kids, up and over. So I'm gonna hold up and over so that I can just slice right in between. And I'm just gonna make little vertical cuts going almost to the root. Definitely do not cut through the root, because again, that's what's helping you hold all your pieces together. And then to get that last cut to make them into cubes, again, I'm going to just simply turn it. And this is where I'm going to have that nice claw hand again, and you're kind of just holding everything together and doing a nice thin little cut here. So again, you're kind of keeping that little rocking motion, keeping the claw fingers so that you're just barely going against your knuckles here. I'm going to move up so I have more space on my cutting board. But we want to just have nice, even sized pieces so that as you're going to actually saute, or you're going to just start them as the base of your soup, you have nice even pieces. So you have your little root end at the bottom, and then you're done. So here's our nice little small dice for our onion. And now with something like celery, you're gonna do basically the same thing. You're going to have that nice rocking motion. I'm gonna cut off my ends since they're not as nice. And sometimes what I'll do, so since one end is usually a little bit thicker and fatter than the other, I'll actually even just do a little slice halfway through so that when I'm cutting it, it will actually make these pieces even with the pieces on the other end. So again, you have your nice claw hand and you're just making a nice little rocking motion. And you're just kind of constantly going back and forth, and you have those fingers out of the way so you're not worried about chopping them. So as I'm slicing, I actually feel the knife on my knuckle, which is a little bit of a weird sensation as you're first getting started. But you get to practice and it gets easier and easier with time. So then you have your nice even slices for your celery. And then I'll show one more here with our carrot, because something you'll sometimes see in recipes is called a julienne. So that's basically making like a little matchbox or matchstick shape, I should say. So it's generally about 2 inches long by about 8 inches around on either side. So you'll start by doing your first initial cut to get it to about 2 inches. Now with carrots and things that are rolling around, it's really important to give yourself a nice flat surface. You can just slice a little bit off the end and you can either eat that or you can save it and put it into stock when you're making stock. And that way then you can have it on a nice flat surface when you go ahead and get started. And so to make a julienne, you'll simply do about 8 of an inch slices. I generally will do an up and over hold for this one too, just so I can get that knife through easily without it moving too much on me. And then you'll go ahead and just reposition them. This one I'll need to get over here to get nice thin little julienne. So I find you see julienne in recipes for things like slaw. I might make my stack even smaller so that I can have it not move around on me too much. Sometimes in salads you'll see them like this. Occasionally you'll see a call for bell peppers to be julienne, but you have nice little julienne matchsticks. One other thing that I'll talk about is mince. So for garlic, I'll actually cut off that little part that connects to the root end. And usually that makes the paper come off really easily, but if it doesn't, you can just gently put it under your knife and hit it with the palm of your hand, and that kind of loosens up that paper and you can pull it right off. Now mincing is very similar to dicing, except that you are going to want the final end product to be even smaller. And with garlic, I always try to remove this section that's in the middle, because that's where the new shoot is trying to come out to actually form a new bulb of garlic. And it can be a little bit bitter. So I'll take it and I'll just kind of gently lift it out with a knife. But then that also gives you a nice flat surface to work with. And similar, like with the onion, I'm going to do cuts one direction, then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to do my cuts the other direction. So again, you have your nice claw grip. You just have a really fine mince. Sometimes you'll mince herbs, especially if you're doing them as like a garnish on a dish, where you just want little tiny pieces so no one gets overwhelmed with a big, chunk of parsley or something. But you have just nice little fine pieces for your mince. And especially when you're doing it with herbs, sometimes if you want to then kind of gather up all your pieces, you can even just put your hand on top and just kind of go over and do a nice little extra chop to make sure you've got all the pieces nice and small. And then you can gather them up and do that again if you'd like. So those will be some of the main cuts that you'll see. Sometimes you'll find recipe calls for something to be roughly chopped. That's often if it's going to be in a soup or stew or something where you're not sauteing it or roasting it, where it really needs to cook evenly at the same time. But I find I don't actually use that chop all that often. Another one that you may hear is a chiffonade, and I will go ahead and link to another video that we've done that actually shows how to roll up a basil leaf. You basically roll it up like a little cigar, and then you just make nice little thin strips, so it makes little ribbons of basil. Again, that's more of a garnish. You'll find that like on top of bruschetta or something. So these are the basic cuts that you really need to master. So get comfortable holding your knife and making sure that you keep that claw hand out of the way.